Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Nathan Kemmler, and I'm the director here. Thank you. This is our first of the calendar year. We have 2 Friends of Alten events a year at least. Thank you for joining us. In just a moment, I'll introduce our guest speaker, but I wanted to let you know about a couple things first. Second floor gallery. If you have not seen it yet, please make time after this event or come back later in the next couple months. It's open until August 31st. It is a collection of still lifes from various Michigan artists and beyond, really. We have decorative arts, we have photography, painting, a real range of things. It's a beautiful show, really interesting show. So please do check that out, like I said, either after tonight's event or come back later. As a reminder, the gallery is open to the public every Friday and Saturday afternoon or by appointment. One of the benefits of a member, you can give us a call at any time and we'll make arrangements to open the gallery for you. So please don't hesitate to do that. Bring your friends, bring your family. We're always happy to showcase the art that we have here. I know Barbara's not here tonight, but special thanks to Barbara Gordon. She is, even though she's not here, she's here in Florida, but she is my co-host and sponsor of this event and has been since the beginning. Also, of course, Don's here, so we have to say thank you to Don. Thank you, Don, for being here. If you don't know Don Lubbers, Don started the art collecting effort here at Grand Valley. And just a reminder, I think, Don, we started with around 400 works at the university in 1999. We're up to 28,000 works now. So that is the second largest art collection in the state of Michigan after the second largest, after the Detroit Institute of Arts, who have a little head start on us, but we're getting there. We do this so our students can engage with art in the everyday, right? So they can go around campus, find art, be inspired by art, but also our faculty can use it in the curriculum. Doesn't matter the discipline, the visual art collection is a resource and it's used throughout the university. So your support here helps that. Your support, of course, the Alten collection in particular is one of those highlights of those 28,000. We have the largest public Alten collection, about 150 works. Paintings, prints. We now have a sculpture. If you've not seen that it went up last year, please see that across the street. It's a beautiful piece. And we continue to collect. And thank you to many of you here who have given Altens to us or have connected us with collectors, help us with information and research. We could not do the things without your support. So truly, thank you. Tonight, we have a guest speaker with us. We wanted to do something around that exhibit that I mentioned upstairs, and so we wanted to really focus on the still lifes. And so tonight, I'm going to introduce Denise. Denise was former director of the Kirk Newman Art School at the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts, but before that, she had her degree in painting from Miami University. Also attended the Cleveland State University and Kent Blossom Summer Art Program at Kent State University. She then went on to receive her MA from the State University of New York. As a professional artist, Denise has been represented by galleries in many regions of the United States. She has numerous solo shows and group shows, and she's got grants from the Michigan Council of the Arts and the National Endowment for the Arts. Her work has been reproduced in art magazines, catalogs, and books, and she has collected both privately and publicly in corporate commissions. So thank you, Denise, for being here tonight. Thank you for sharing your insights on the still life genre and your response to Alten in particular. So please help welcome Denise to the stage.
I would like to thank the Friends of Alten for having me here tonight. I really appreciate it. And also I'd like to thank Jessica Sundstrom, who has helped me immensely with the program tonight. I'm talking about the still life because it's something that I have been engaged with for almost 40 years. I really enjoy the genre, and I feel that it's a very important genre in art. The still life emerged as a genre and a professional specialization in Western painting in about the 16th century. Advanced forms of still life allowed artists freedom to experiment with the arrangement of elements and with composition so that they didn't have to copy what was in front of them. They could change things around. They could move objects. And if you see in this painting, if any of you are gardeners, you realize that all these flowers don't grow at the same time. So it's a great arrangement of flowers, but the artist, and I'm sure he was working from life, had to wait over the months for the flowers to bloom and put them in this composition. They also used at the time insects as part of the nature, showing that sort of the fulfillment of the natural still life, because if you have flowers, you're going to have worms, you're going to have snails, and you're going to have insects. Before the 1700s, still life painting contained religious and allegorical symbolism. At the height of the genre, the still life depicted the patron's wealth, a biblical story, or warned the viewer of the transient life. And in this painting here, you can see that it shows the profusion of food that was available to this patron, and also the types of food that would probably be a little more exotic for the common person. This arrangement, different from the one that was before, where it was very central and almost stilted, this one is more active, with things all over the field and different shapes, different colors. And so the viewer's eye, instead of focusing on the middle of the composition, is moved all over the image area. The first two were Dutch paintings. This is an Italian artist, and we get something a little more exotic once again. We get a parrot in the still life. So along with the fruit, or along with the vegetables, I think, yeah, the fruit's in the left-hand corner there. Along with that, you'll get some of the flowers that are growing at the time, and then this exotic bird. So it's a combination of different life forms and forms that at one time were alive. Many contemporary artists used a lot of these objects too. Contemporary still life artists are challenged by two imperatives: a passion for form perceived, either factually or essentially, and also they're ordering the space, no matter how untraditional it can be. The best contemporary still life is art that lives in limbo between the artist and the need to describe form, objectivity, and at the same time to transcend the description that is on the picture plane. Later still life work depicted a variety of media. In the early still lifes, they were mostly paintings, but as years went on, found objects, photography, printmaking, and even graphic arts started to use the still life image. Matthias Alten was as you all know, had painted different genres, but he really, I think, had a very great strength when he used the still life. The chrysanthemums, the flowers are painted with energy and liveliness. The composition begins in the lower right-hand corner, drawing the viewer into the picture. Repetition of white and yellow colored flowers move the eye around the entire picture frame. The deep red flowers in the composition, and you can see them in the background, they kind of fade into the deeper dark background, keep the flowers in the background, and the orange color that they are as a combination, the orange color that is also in the background is a combination of the yellow and the red. The irises are, once again, a very painterly rendition of iris. The white color draws the iris from the foreground, while the purple color recedes. The exception is the purple iris in the lower bottom of the painting is in the very foreground, and it comes into the foreground by overlapping the leaves and the other flowers. The long vertical picture plane echoes the long stems and the height of these iris flowers. The dark muted background color allows the white flowers to really be accentuated and take center stage. Red roses in a glass vase, And these 3 paintings that I've just shown you are in the exhibition on the 2nd floor, so you can see them in real life. This one is placed off-center. Unlike the first still life I showed you, the first Dutch still life, with the white tablecloth on the right side pointing to the background. So the back corner of the table points out to the background so that you have a little more active background. The swirling green brush strokes repeat the curved volume of the vase. So the vase not only depicts the translucent quality of the vase with the water in it, but the brush strokes help the volume of the vase. These brush strokes differ in direction from the leaves. The leaves are painted in more of a flat and more creating the form rather than the volume. The reflection of the tabletop breaks up the foreground, adding color and shape. So you can see instead of having it just being a plain white tablecloth on the table, it's broken up by the shadows and the reflections of this vase. The subtle frame shape of the background balances the white and pink flowers jutting out in the lower corners. So that helps the subtle background, adds to bringing this beautiful arrangement of roses to the foreground rather than competing with it. Pink and white roses, Portland. There's an action of spilling from the container. So once again, we don't have a stagnant still life, but we have one that even though the flowers are still, in the motion you feel from the placement on the painting. The different textures of the flowers add to the grouping of it, and it shows that there are the different spots of red really help the flower and move the eye around. We had another Alten piece called the Egyptian Lotus, and it's a beautiful piece. And it had a beautiful subtle color palette to it, and it was very relaxing and calm piece. A little different than the other ones because the color palette was very monochromatic. Okay, this is one of my pieces. This is the first painting that I had completed in watercolor. I began as an abstract painter, so a lot of my paintings will have abstract qualities to them. Instead of really concentrating on the subject matter, I concentrate more on the aesthetic elements of direction, form, shape, texture, and color. I discovered watercolor, and when I first took it in college, I didn't like it at all because we wet a piece of paper, everything went everywhere, and I'm more of a control person. So I found out that, one, if you don't soak the paper and wet it, you can paint in different sections. So you can soak and wet sections at a time and control the paint in certain areas, like the leaf, the petal of the flower, the wood on the rocker. And that opened a whole world for me. Another thing that opened the world of watercolor for me was the fact that as a painter in abstraction, I would work quite large, like 8 by 10 feet. And all of a sudden in watercolor, I thought of watercolor paintings as very small. And I was told that you could buy rolls of watercolor papers. So now I could paint very large. And so this is probably about 3 by 4 feet. And I've painted as large as 4 by 6 feet as a watercolor painting. So I found that more exciting and more interesting. Also, watercolor didn't have to be very pastel-y and very washed out. You could use saturated colors and get a real presence to the watercolor. After 40 years and hundreds of still life paintings, I have not tired of the genre. Still life gets a sort of a bad rap. Everybody thinks that landscape and figure are superior genre to still life, and it's sort of gets a back seat and is the ugly stepchild. And for me, I find it a wonderful genre because you're using objects and we all have personal objects. They may seem ordinary to people, but invaluable to us because of the person who gave it to us or the memory it evokes. So in still life, you can use all the abstraction from an abstract painting, but then have another layer and another meaning to the work that evokes emotion to the viewer. I concentrated first when I was working in watercolor on improving my color relationships. So I worked a lot on, the reaction of colors next to each other, how color and form react, and also the boldness of the color and the saturation. Then I went on to composition, and I really enjoy unusual compositions, as you will see. My primary interest is in forms, shapes, and textures. I investigate the meaning that I or the viewer may draw from the objects, and some have personal significance, and others have vague thoughts or memories. I set up my objects either on the floor or on a low cabinet, and I like the view of looking down on objects. I find that the shapes are a little more interesting. I use a strong light source. I don't have a north-facing window. My drapes are usually closed, and the light is on the still life. I adjust the lights for maximum form on the objects to create the best shadows. So you can see there are shadows here. So sometimes the shadow shapes are as important as the shape of the actual object. I paint directly from the setup, from the objects, on an upright easel. So instead of most watercolors paint on a flat surface or a little bit raised, I paint on an easel that is vertical. I infuse the composition with a great deal of movement, using color in unusual ways, as well as other methods of evoking the viewer into the composition. So you can see by these leaves in the lower right-hand corner, I'm drawing the viewer into the painting. I want to engage the viewer because I'm intrigued with what meaning the viewer might bring to the object. I don't a lot of times like to explain why I use objects or what the painting means. What I had in mind doesn't really matter. My concern is that I assemble a group of objects that evoke a response from the viewer, making them directly identifying with the painting. And so when I speak about the rest of the work, you'll see that sometimes I'll talk about the objects, but I'll mostly talk about the aesthetic parts of the painting. So in this Amish rocker, it's a rocker crushing a peony. There's action in the still life because you're waiting for this rocker to come over and crush the flower. It represents the transitory life of the flower, and the action is also portrayed by the strong diagonals, the leaves coming up from the right, the stem of the iris going up, the bars of the rocker, and the bottom of the rocker, and some of the tile grout. So there's a lot of diagonal movement in the painting to create movement. White peony is using flowers that are blooming in my garden. I also work with specific light, and in this case, it's my skylight that has thrown this kind of like square or rectangular shape of light onto the subject matter, and then creating the shadows down below. And I sort of enhanced the dark areas. They weren't that dark, but I used that to really pop the flowers so that the purple, the iris, and the peony would really come forward and have emphasis for the viewer. This is peony and iris. So I'm using some of the same subject matter. I'm using the iris and the peony and the circular base, but adding other elements to it. And a lot of times I'll do that. I'll repeat different subject matter. In fact, I had two paintings a painting that I had done with a kimono and some flowers, and the Nordstrom brothers really liked it, and they wanted two more similar. So I had to take the same setup, but move things around and sort of challenge myself to come up with two unique paintings that looked similar, but were different and could stand on their own. Apples and pears, I did this painting as an example for a book that I was in where it showed step by step of how the painting was done. And here I used the repetition of objects to carry the viewer's eye through. So you've got the green apples and the red pears, but you also have these circular movements that help the repetition and the eye move through the painting. And this also, underneath the pears, the green color was used for shading, and underneath the apples, the red color was used. So the palette, even though I have several complementary colors in them, they're complementary colors that you can see, but they're also used within the objects. This is called randomness of life. It's a complementary color. Once again, we're doing the greens and the purple, and so it really makes the green ginkgo leaves pop. I have circular objects, two circular objects, the lantern and the silver bowl. And then I'm showing live ginkgo leaves and then a representation of a ginkgo leaf in silver. This is cultural convergence. The shadows are important, or as important as the shape. So I have a die-cut card that is throwing these different shadows. So the card is there, but it's almost as if the shadows become more prominent than the actual object that it's being cast from. I like to use unusual objects. So in this case, there are objects from all different cultures, and they work similarly in color, but they're also tied together in the fact that they are quite exotic in their different approaches. I have a fondness for the long, thin vertical, and it comes from seeing a lot of Asian art. And if you think about the Chinese scroll paintings, they're long and thin like this. And as you go back, or as you go up in the painting, it is taking you back in space. So in this case, it's the same thing. That Japanese flute is in the foreground, and as you're working your way back, you're getting the space all the way back to that little sculpture in the back. The Year of the Dragon. This painting has mostly black and grays with the pops of red. And the viewer eye moves through the composition by the diagonals and the reds. The bursting stem in the back gives interest to the very dark background, and also, I think, helps the viewer look at that pot that would, if it didn't have that, would just sort of fade in the background. And once again, I'm using the same object of that die-cut card, but this time, instead of casting the shadows, I'm using it as a diagonal in the foreground of the painting. Seeing in a different light. And I did this one because I always use very strong light on my objects. And in this case, I relied on the light being cast from that paper star. And very dim, I wanted to try to work in very low light so that there are some objects and some areas that sort of fade away in the background that the viewer has to really look for. And then there are other objects like that star that really pop up and almost come falling out of the top of the composition, as well as the chair with the glasses. So there's a lot of imbalance in this composition. So, and that also creates movement within what would be a still life. Perseverance. Once again, the long, thin vertical, and relying on the red spots to move the viewer's eye from the bottom all the way to the top, so that, once again, the composition isn't stagnant. The diagonal lines of the chopsticks bring you into the composition and then draw you up and up to the top. And then the strip on the right-hand top side is, an object and some cord, but very subtle. So once again, the viewer has to really look at that area to be drawn in there. This one's called Spent Offerings. It's a peony flower in different stages of bloom and wilting. And I like this because it shows from the bloom to the deterioration, and even in its state of starting to fade and wilt, there's still interesting shapes and color of the peony. So it's very fresh at the bottom, but as you're working your way to the top, it starts fading away and wilting away. The flower is placed in the bowl as sort of an offering, and it's the flowers that are wilted and will be offered in some type of ritual. And these flowers are, once again, from my garden. I wanted to try something very different because I work with a lot of color. I thought it would be interesting to work with just black and white. And if you've ever taken an art class and people have problems with color because they don't get the right values and everything is sort of mid-range or light, and they tell people, well, then, try to do a black and white study. And nowadays we can take a picture of a painting with our phone and turn it into black and white so we can see the strength of the values within the artwork. Well, this way I thought, well, I will, do this and try to do a painting that can express all of these objects, their form, their shape, but using only black, only monochromatic, black, white, and the grays. And also all these objects were that color. So it was, I wasn't having to translate the color into the values. There are times when objects inspire me to do paintings. In this case, it's called Carol's Kimono, and this was Carol's kimono. She was a friend of ours, and she was a chef. But in this painting that represents Carol, all the tools of the trade are made of glass, depicting the fragile and short life of a chef that usually gets burned out in the kitchen. Not literally, but figuratively. The umbrella is of paper, and it's a shelter, but it's not a very protective one. This is remembering the past. And what I liked about this one was this greens, the colors are red and purple mostly, which are complementary to the green color. So the green stem really pops out and weaves through this piece, once again, making sure that, I guide the viewer's eye, that they don't miss anything from the container of the bamboo and the wooden Japanese shoe, all the way through to the book, reading the title, and then taking you over to the puppet who's pointing back out again. And so, trying to lead the viewer through this maze of objects so that it doesn't just look like a jumble of things that you don't know where to look. I'm consciously guiding your eye through it. I wanted to work with space, and I started to try to put objects that were very close to what would be the viewer in the painting. So I thought I'll use these bamboo stakes that you have to kind of look through, and this is seeing through, and you're seeing not only into the painting, which we always should be doing, but there's a barrier before you look at the painting. And then in the painting are my sketchbook, a sketch of a watercolor, and then in the bag, it's kind of hard to see because it's in shadow, is another watercolor sketch. So it's work that I have created, and I'm painting things that I have already either drawn or painted. And the chain also helps, once again, to weave you through the painting and to guide your eye through looking at everything that's there. The watering can is a strong, hardscape diagonal line, and it's in contrast to the soft, fluffy peacock feathers, and their diagonals are not as pronounced, but we're going in all different directions here with diagonals. The peacock feather represents rebirth, renewal, and vitality. And also the watering can carries water that provides the same. The treasure box. These are depicting two different boxes. One box holds jewelry. It's a kingfisher pen with a coral bead on it. And the other box, which is holding these different objects, is actually a box that someone made for me to hold my watercolor paint. So for me, they're treasure boxes because they're both holding precious items, a piece of jewelry and my watercolor paint, which is very precious to me. Most of the painting is very subtle browns and like a dark blue. And then you get pops of color with the peacock feather and the kingfisher pin in opposite corners of the painting, and then a little bit of blue on the cups so that it isn't just a bland, neutral painting. It's a painting that does have color reaction to it. This is the multiplicity of life. And once again, I've experimented with different layers of materials from the foreground all the way down to the background. And so with working with still life, a lot of times, unless you add other elements like landscape or an interior, you don't get the wide depth that you would if you paint objects, because usually they're not that big and they're not that deep. So I've been trying to work with ways to create more depth in the still life and have the viewer not only go around the picture plane, but also into it. Precious gifts. These are, once again, this is a painting that was inspired by the objects. The fish, the vase, the scarves were all gifts given to me by friends. And I thought that I could combine them. They were all given to me at one Christmas, so I tried to combine all of these together to create a composition, and then hanging the fish so that the fish comes way in the foreground of the piece, and then as you go into it, you get to the vase, and then all the fabric in the back. So there's, once again, multi-layers of objects that the viewer can be drawn into. This one is called, This Is My Life Now. It's sort of an autobiographic painting. It's a painting of my studio at the time, and it shows that the materials, the palette, the brushes, the sketchbook, the watercolor pad, and the watercolor book are all unused. There's not paint on the brushes, there's not paint in the palette, the books aren't open, they're just sitting there waiting to be used. And the reason is there's a crib in the back, and I have been disrupted by a grandchild. So I have put my painting aside for a little bit, and this is my studio, and it has until a month ago, has had a crib in it. It's used for multi-purposes. The bronze fish represents the impediment of the flow of the watercolor, and the sketchbook on the ground shows sort of the chaos of what has happened, that I can't paint the way I want to right now because there's too much going on in my life with the introduction of a new grandchild. Staghorn fern. Working with this spatial concept of trying to get things coming way in the foreground, I took this basket with the staghorn fern and hung it way in the foreground of the setup. So I was actually looking through the basket and the staghorn fern down onto the table with the other objects. And I really liked the way the staghorn fern leaves break up this painting, and even the negative space. And that's another thing I haven't been mentioning, but in composition, if you're really concentrating on composition, you not only look at the objects, but you look at what's called negative space, which is the space that's left outside the object. So in the leaves, all those little areas that are created from like the holes in the leaves, and the space between the basket and the watering can, and the space between the wire that goes up and the leaves. All of the shapes, when I have negative shapes, when I draw out the painting before I paint it, and that's another thing I didn't mention, is that what I do is I will draw the entire composition onto the watercolor paper with pencil so that I know where everything's going to be, because in watercolor, there's not a lot of wiggle room like you would get in pastel or oil. You can't move things around. You can change things a little bit, but you can't move like the scissors to another spot because you'll still see those scissors. So when I draw out the composition, I check for the negative space and what they look like, and I feel that it's as important as the shape that I'm looking at of these leaves. And when I draw the leaves, I want to make sure that I have an interesting looking leaf and that it creates a good relationship with the other leaves and creates shapes within the cluster of leaves and the negative space. So I'm true to the still life, but not. If I have to move something in my drawing to make the painting better, I will move the drawing around and change it. So for me, it's more important, and I think it would also be to Matthias Alten after seeing his work, that you use the objects and the subject matter as inspiration, but you're not a slave to it. You're not an illustrator, you're an artist interpreting what you see. So you can, move the rows, maybe have, change the color. And the same thing here. I would move the leaves around. I, might move once I get the drawing down, I may not like the position of the scissors, so I can move those around. It is more important that the painting is the way I want it rather than me copying the still life that's in front of me. This is a more recent painting. It's called The Air That We Breathe, and it could be interpreted as, a climate painting. But what there are in here are air plants. And they're plants that I thought grew in the air, but after they died, I realized they had to be watered once in a while. So, yeah. So they are no longer with us, but they made good subject matter. And I liked the idea when I started this composition. The long, thin vase is hung in front of the still life, just like the basket was in the staghorn. And it creates these great shadows on the wall, like multiple shadows. And I actually like the shadows more than anything else. And so that's what inspired me for this painting, and that's what excited me about the setup, was the shadows on the wall. And so I felt that, it could be a very sparse subject-object painting and put a little more emphasis on the shadows that are being created. Everybody likes to see how an artist works. And so this is the painting that's on my easel right now. What I told you I paint upright on an easel. My watercolor paper is stapled to a plywood board because this painting is probably, 3 by 4 feet maybe. And I like to have very clean edges on my watercolor because when I have it framed, I have the mat not up to the image, but giving it a little breathing space. So the edges have to be completely straight and clean so that the mat can expose them. And so what you see on the edges is masking, or it's actually drafting tape, keeping that part of the paper clean. But along the edges, you can see paint swatches, and that's where I test my paint. I also have scraps of watercolor paper, because sometimes when I mix something up, I want to make sure it's the right color, I want to make sure it's the right value, and so I test it along the edges of the paper. This painting is not done. I painted the flower first because it wasn't going to be around a long time. I also had to paint the teapot very quickly because it's a teapot my husband uses for his students in his studio. So I could only use it on certain days. And so I had to keep going back and forth with the teapot. And the part that is still not finished is that up at the top, the flowers have what's called masking fluid on it, and it's sort of like a rubber cement kind of coating that I can paint over and then peel off so that the color and the flowers will stay there, and I don't have to worry about painting around each one. I can paint in broad strokes because with this large area, I have to paint more broadly because I don't want it to dry and I don't want it to streak. So what I have to do yet is the container that's holding all the flowers still has to be developed. It has a lot of texture to it. Well, not so much texture. It has a lot of kind of sheen to the piece. And then the background, the top background will have to be darker. And then I will also have to adjust those flowers because when I pulled the masking fluid off the areas that I painted really black, the background black, they faded away. So I had to go back into them and sort of make them a little stronger and more saturated. So this is a work in progress, and I'm hoping that it will be done soon. Along with Matthias Alten, other people, including myself, other artists, including myself, sometimes blur the line between still life and landscape, still life and interior, sometimes still life in the figure. So the following paintings that I'm going to show you blur this line. So in this case, this is one of my paintings that is called In the Garden. So I took the still life material and I put it in the garden, and then I painted the background, and then in the studio I could then come up with the staghorn ferns, and then I added the landscape out of my imagination. So I like the idea of putting the still life in a different environment other than just in the studio or in an interior area. The Window of Dreams. This one, once again, is one of mine, and it incorporates a little bit of the landscape out the window. This was painted from the exact setup. It's a window in a house in upstate, well, in the Western Catskills in New York. The house belonged to my mentor, Sandra Freckleton, and it was a house that I would visit with my family every couple years. And it was a magical house for us because it had two artists that were married that created beautiful works of art, and their house was like a work of art. So in little areas, Sandra would have almost little still life set up so that you could just paint a still life from anywhere in her house. And that's what I did here, was I took this little pear that was sitting in her window, and she grew a lot of geraniums, and used that for my still life. Along with watercolor, I do a medium called encaustic. And encaustic is using wax. And so I have on the board a drawing in pencil or some type of hard material, like a hard pastel. Then wax is layered over it, and then on top of it, I can use soft pastel and more pencil, and with a heat gun, fuse it all together. So this has a beautiful waxy surface. The pieces that I do in encaustic are small because they're very time consuming, but I really enjoy changing media once in a while, and unlike watercolor, I can move things around if I want or scrape them out. And so this is a still life that is incorporating, we could say, landscape, because this is an exterior, but yet I felt that this was like a little, when I saw this little flower in the window, I felt like it was a little still life because it had elements of a window and a flower and some bricks, even though it was outside. This is another one of my encaustics where I thought, it incorporates the landscape, although it's blurred from this distorted glass, and using the flower as a still life element. And then this one is from Sandra's house again with her geraniums. And I liked the geraniums as using them as an object with up close, very sharp detail, and then the very faded, subtle landscape out the window. So incorporating landscape and the still life. This one is Grant Wood. And here's an interior, which is mostly interior, but you can see little still life setups within it. And so once again, blurring the line between the two. And of course, I couldn't not talk about still life without Paul Cézanne. His still life really changed the idea of how we paint still life for artists from the 1900s on. He influenced many artists, and I'll show you two after this, that had great influence. He greatly influenced. But he took fruit and vegetables and used them more as objects and flattened them out. He emphasized their color, volume, and shape, rather than trying to paint a juicy pear or a great apple or a peach. He concentrated more on the roundness of the peach and the little bit of color, the shape of the pear, and really flattened things out so that you would notice that rather than the qualities of the fruit. This is John Frederick Petro, and this is kind of like a trompe-l'oeil, where he takes the same subject matter and uses it repetitively. So they're all books, and it would be kind of boring if he didn't do it in this way where they're sort of tumbling and jumbling and different colors and different shapes, and some are open, some are closed. And, this piece of paper in the front that, represents, typical trompe-l'oeil. When you see things, they always seem to want to put like a little piece of paper or a card that they can show off their ability to render that. Okay, William Bailey. He was influenced by Paul Cézanne, once again, using the objects as volume and their relationship to each other. So these are objects that he has in his studio, but they're very simple forms. So what I think he has done is he's taken the form and made it into its almost essence, rather than trying to paint all the detail and all the little, areas of it. It's also a very tranquil painting, along with Morandi. Morandi was greatly influenced by Cézanne, and here it goes to the extreme where you can really see that these objects are down to their essence. They're not, they look like a bottle, they look like a vase, but it's more of what you're seeing, just basically abstract shapes rather than identifying the objects. Ralph Goings was a photorealist, so he takes the still life, and the opposite of the last two painters, renders every little detail. And what he does is he takes a photo, projects the photo, draws the photo, and then paints starting at the top, copying the photo throughout the whole painting. And he is then, instead of true to the still life, he's true to the photograph. Here's an assemblage of a still life using different objects that you wouldn't really think of in a still life. They're steel bars and like bits of tools and parts of metal, and then this little wire coming off. And, just really taking the idea of still life to a different extreme. Then there are also different media. This is a silver print by Olivia Parker. It's called Miss Appleton's Shoes, and she has these little ballet slippers that, alone wouldn't be very exciting, but running these little ribbons through, causing a lot of activity on the surface, really adds interest to the piece. And then Carol Wax, This is a mezzotint done by rocking a plate with a rocker that has little teeth in it and creates little tiny dots so that the whole plate is all dots, and if you printed it, it would be black. And so she scrapes away in different layers to create the different values. So here's something that's a utilitarian object placed right in the middle of the composition, which would be kind of boring, but then you get these mysterious lighting on it and these strange shapes that are in the background that then make this very, very uninteresting object a very interesting piece of art. And this is Katja Axman. This is a color aquatint. And once again, a type of print that you would print in a print studio by hand. And she likes to use a variety of objects. She likes to use a lot of feminine objects representing women. And the piece looks more like a pattern. It's on a pattern rug, but all of her objects, there's so many of them, and they're dispersed in a way where you feel like the pattern rug is repeated again into the objects. And then you have the two flowers that kind of break it up. And last but not least, we have, again, Matthias Alten. And I want to talk about this piece because we have sort of a still life with the amaryllis by the window with the nude in front. And what's kind of unusual about this is that you would think that the nude would take center stage, but, because it's in the foreground and she's looking right at you. But then you have this red amaryllis in the background and this little blue. And so it's almost in competition. Do you look at the flower? Do you look at the nude? And so the painting is like truly integrated with both. Well, that is the end of my passion for still life. I hope it has given you a new appreciation for still life. And I really appreciate being here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. I always find it fascinating hearing from artists directly on their perspective, right? The idea that a still life is kind of a misnomer of sorts, right? There's the intentionality of action and tension and movement, and the particular objects have meaning behind them, right? So this is not some static happenstance scene when you're looking at a still life. It's a very intentional moment filled with action. So yeah, I hope that helps widen your perspective on still lifes when you see them. Hopefully that helps you view and engage with the work, but I know that you're all going to go upstairs afterwards and see. To help you with that, we do have the bar still open. Please stay, grab another drink, talk with Denise, go upstairs and enjoy the evening. It's just a reminder, your support here is part of the Matthias Alten Endowment. That's the Friends of Alten. We do have other funds around the Gordon Gallery, around the Catalog Resonate project of Matthias Alten. We've also now added catalog resumes for Armand Marazan, another regional artist, and we're in talks of adding more artists and collaborations in that coming soon. We also have our general endowment for all the art at Grand Valley, if that's something you're interested in. Please find me afterwards, or any of our team members or development officers here tonight. And with that, thank you for being here tonight. I hope you've had a good evening, and please stay. Thank you.